Welcome to Plot Armor, and today we have the long-awaited tier list for Kislev. We're going to jump straight into this, and hopefully this will give you a really good idea of how to approach your campaigns. My tier lists run uniquely. They run from tier 1 up to tier 5, and the idea is to show you the progression of your story, i.e. your campaign, which shows you which units are good, at what time, how you use them in combination with each other, and roughly what challenges you should have, and that it's sometimes a case of a unit being outperformed by better options, or just not really optimal at that point of the campaign, which justifies the rating they are awarded. This is all done in tandem with community feedback. Thank you everyone else who's contributed. Feel free to join Discord if you'd like to have some conversation around it. And kicking off anyway, let's go quickly through the tiers and what they mean. I do not have multiple takes of S tier. I have one S tier. We don't do S triple plus, anything like that. S tier is purely overpowered. You could nerf this unit, increase the upkeep, all sorts of things. It would still be what you take because it either plugs a massive hole in the faction's weaknesses or it is just simply too good. The actual top tier more being A, excellent, which means that these units will typically still be great even 2 tiers above where they are. Going down to solid, this is a great unit. This is something that many players will just mandatorily hire every single game, will still easily be relevant in the next tier up. C is usable. This is not a bad word. This does not mean the unit is subpar. It is just completely fine and usable, but not really essential. Depending on your playstyle, will depend on whether you hire this unit or not. Going down to D, in the face of better options, this unit is simply outperformed by this or by virtue of the campaign having challenges that this can no longer address. And going down to counterproductive, only one unit has ever received this, and spoiler alert, Kislev are quite well rounded in their military and they don't have anyone in this particular tier. So kicking off tier 1, we have the iconic Kislev Kossar, an amazing, basically a tier 0 unit because you can hire this from anywhere. Pretty much as soon as these guys come out of the womb, they throw a pickaxe in one hand, a real axe in the other, they get them working, drinking and preparing for the end of the world. They are an incredibly robust unit and they really stand up into arguably tier 3. They'll start to taper off a bit around tier 4 because their arrows will start bouncing off enemy armor, but even still they do an amazing job and are better in melee than they have any right to be. They are just an excellent all-round unit, one of the best basic starting units in the entire game. I can't say enough good things about them. It does have 2 variants, but let's talk about why the basic variant with the axe is better than the one with the spear. Even in melee, the basic axe variant also has an additional 8 melee attack as well as plus 8 charge, so really it's a much more flexible unit against more things. Basically, the spear will give you maybe a tiny bit more line holding with an extra 4 melee defense. It also does some extra anti-large damage, but it really isn't enough to help push away anything that does flank you. Yes, it will do a bit of damage versus horses, but really it's not enough. Save your money on the spears and go for the basic one, the cheaper upkeep, the basic axe. It is worth it because the bow is what does most of the damage. Completing tier 1, we have the Dervisher, and it's a pretty good basic scouting cavalry. It does have a decent charge bonus for what it is, but really the main reason you use these is in sieges where they come as part of the garrison, and they actually do really well here. They're fast, they're nimble, they can really harass archers quite well. Arguably hiring one of them might afford you a bit more flexibility, but otherwise I would always take the ranged variant. They're C tier, they're usable, nothing really too special. Heading tier 2 is the only unit I've ever had that's not a caster that has hit the S tier in terms of heroes, and that is the head of the orthodoxy, the Patriarch. And you might be wondering, why is this such a good unit? It's only okay in melee, it has very mediocre casting ability, but in campaign it is fundamentally a cornerstone to what makes this faction work so well. It's able to heal any of your units on the battlefield with Saliak's Lullaby. This is a 2-use spell when you put the points into it, and it essentially at tier 2 allows you to group hug. Group hugging is a term I made up at the end of your battles. Grab all of your characters together, huddle them up, and just stack your healing spells over and over, getting them up to a stronger point than before they started the battle, which is just amazingly good. If keeping your lords and casters alive wasn't enough, these guys can go on a bear mount, and needless to say, that's pretty damn good. They require a bit of movement. Make sure you don't pivot on the spot and you're always moving in a forward arc. Keep this in mind and then make sure you pair them with the right units, and by which I mean the Bear Cavalry. Every Patriarch can get the Urson's Roar ability, giving a temporary boost to charge bonus, which means have one of these with 2 or 3 Warcav units, drop your bonuses and charge in and tear whatever you're aiming at apart. I call this the Bear Squad, so just a Patriarch, 2 or 3 units of Bear Cav, Trust me, this will make your money back. But is this enough to give them S tier? You would think probably not, and that's fair enough, but they are able to support the Bear Cavalry as well as heal them, and Bear Cavalry are models with a lot of hit points. Unless you're undead, you can't resurrect dead units, so most of the time your units will die before the healing can have any effect, but the bears are so tanky, they'll live long enough to benefit from these heals, staying alive for longer. You can send a Patriarch to an injured group of warbears, drop Salyak's Lullaby, heal them up, and then lead another charge, boosting that as well. They are incredibly flexible, and once you get them to level 11, they're no longer as vulnerable. To boot to all of this, off the battlefield, they have the replenishment skill, which especially if you're playing on the harder difficulties is absolutely essential. And to top it all off, at level 20 you can choose one of several skills. The one I love is to give your army 20% resistance to all attrition, and this includes Nurgle anywhere. Stack a few Patriarchs with this and you will be immune to attrition, which is a much bigger deal now with the new corruption systems. If you're having trouble playing with Kislev, check out my mastery guide and follow the advice there on Patriarchs. I promise you it will pay off in dividends and you will start smashing those campaigns. Next up we have the Armoured Kossar with the axe and shield, and do you remember why I said not to worry about the basic Kossar with any upgrades? Well, you don't need to, because their job is to shoot. You don't want them in melee because your Armoured Kossars are the ones you want getting into melee. All Armoured Kossar variants have a basic firearm, deal some good, nice early armor-piercing damage, and this particular variant is a solid A tier because what it delivers for a tier 2 unit is absolutely obscene. 80 armor, a silver shield blocking 55% of all projectiles, 32 melee attack, 38 melee defense. This is just insanely good for the time you get them, and they'll still be able to hold the line respectively long enough for your ranged units to do what they need to do for the next couple of tiers. Now, you don't spam this unit, believe me, just 2 on each flank. You only need 4 of them, but they will do enough. You want them on the front line so they will be able to get those handgun shots off. Have your basic Kossars firing over the top of them. They will do great, and it's really hard to get shields with Kislev. They really lack them, so this is a great way to get an amazing line holder, some gunpowder, and some good melee stats on a big burly man for an absolute discount price. So absolutely worth getting these guys. I recommend them, and if you're having any trouble in your armies, if your basic Kossars aren't quite cutting it, just trust me, 2 of these on each flank to be able to hold that line will make your basic Kossars last much longer, allowing you to field cheaper armies for longer, which, as you know, with Kislev's economy is a big deal. On the other hand, the Armoured Kossars with great weapons, they're a good unit, boasting quite amazing stats for a tier 2 unit, but they lose 8 melee defense and their shield so they can wield a 2-handed weapon which deals armor piercing damage. Now this is an example of a unit which trades some of its abilities to get something else, but that something else is armor piercing damage at a point in the game you're not really dealing with a lot of armor. So unless you're crisis hiring these guys because you have a tide of monsters coming your way, just go with the basic shielded variant. Finishing off tier 2 is the Horse Archer, basically superior to the basic Dervisher, has all the same speed and ability to skirmish, and of course, well, you've got that bow, so you can actually skirmish. If you had the choice, this is definitely the better variant to take. It will start to taper off soon, so I would only probably get 1 in my armies, but if you want to go that way, you certainly can do it. You can live with or live without, depending on your playstyle. Starting off in tier 3, at B tier, we have the Streltsi. This is a very well known and highly regarded unit. I mean, look at him, he's carrying an axe which doubles as a gun. It's badass, and man, they're a pretty good all-round unit, but why are they only B tier? For some reason, these guys seem to get this reputation that they're like the Sisters of Avalon of gunpowder, and I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but that's just not the case here. They are a very good long-range armor-piercing unit, and they are the armor-piercing unit for Kislev. If you're playing the Realms of Chaos campaign, you might not find them as useful because you're versing a lot of demons there which don't have a lot of armor, but when you are versing armor, these are a great unit to bring. But are they a unit that you should spam? And the answer is no, they are not. Their melee attack and defense are just shy of 30. They've got 70 armor, which is respectable, but this is not going to hold the line in tier 4 and definitely not tier 5. You will want something up the front to help them absorb everything coming at them, but they're also a gunpowder unit, so you don't really want to spam them too heavily, especially when there's other units that can work with them that will probably give you more in a cumulative way. Now, there is argument to put them in A tier, I certainly agree, because once you build up Prague, some of the war sled buildings, you can increase your global recruitment for these guys, and basically in a single turn, you can raise a stack of like 10 of them in the snap of your fingers. And yes, they're not necessarily an all-comers unit, but man, they will do at least something to anything the game can throw at you. So they become an excellent global recruitment crisis unit, and you can make a glorious stack of these guys. You throw enough Streltsi at something, it's going to go down. So they are very, very good for that, and they just fall out of A tier into B tier because for the most of the campaign, this is where they sit. They are a good support unit, which you can hire more of if you're facing the Armor of Chaos or the Dwarfs. Just make sure you use them in context and in conjunction with other units. You only need between 2 and at most 6 or even 8 in any army. Between 2 and 4 should honestly be enough. Next, we are moving on to the Tzar Guard, and if there's ever been a unit in the game that can remotely challenge the Dwarven Ironbreakers in the line holding position, it is these guys. They are freaking excellent, and this shielded variant, for all the aforementioned reasons for the Armoured Kossar, is the variant you should take. Blocking missiles, holding the line with better melee defense. Not only will these guys hold the line to allow your Kossars to fire behind them, they will protect your Streltsi, allowing them to get straight gunfire shots, but they will also make an excellent anvil for your Bear Cavalry to come crashing into. Even in the late game, having 90 armor, 50 melee defense standard, these guys are not going anywhere anytime soon. The fact you can get them at tier 3 is incredible. Having 2 on one flank, 2 on the other will just hold the line against anything they can throw at you. And the fact this is only tier 3, you can just build this building at minor settlements to hire yourself some extra Tzar Guard. Just great, flexible, love them. Coming from the exact same building at tier 3, you also get the Tzar Guard with great weapons, and this gives you some extra armor piercing damage, but boy does it come at the expense of defense. You go from 50 down to 36 melee defense. Some people might argue that this is a rough placing and they deserve to be B tier, and that does have some merit, but the reality is armor piercing will come much better from Streltsi, and line holding will be done much better from the shielded variants. You're at this point where you need either defenders or damage dealers. Having something in the middle isn't really what's needed. In a crisis, you could hire some of these to help deal with some big armored baddies. I would definitely recommend hiring a couple of these if you have a heavily armored matchup, but other than that, these are really going to be situational and will honestly struggle in the later tiers, whereas the shielded version will see you through. Being notably more expensive than Streltsi, and the shielded variant is what cements it as a C tier unit in campaign. Moving on to the mobile units, and we have our first D tier, and unfortunately it is the beloved Snow Leopard. It looks freaking awesome. I do like this unit, but let me just try to salvage this. This is a great summon. Your Frost Maidens and Frost Witches can both drop a once per battle summon of one of these, and they are quite good in that regard. All of this helps towards pushing the enemy back, as well as these can actually kite around the main line and then target their enemy archers, so there's some utility there. There's another great trick, which I call the Leopard Bomb. I need to work on my names for things, but you essentially summon the Leopard into a blob of enemy units and then drop down your Tempest Bombardment spell, allowing you to get some amazing group damage without costing you anything except for a unit that was already disposable. So as a summon, this is an excellent summon unit. Should you hire it in your armies? Absolutely not. It is going to get shredded by a good number of tier 3 equivalents which have that armor piercing, and really this unit would have been good at tier 2, but at tier 3 it just doesn't catch up, and in tier 4 it will get torn apart against more things than not. Next up, and in a similar boat, this would have been probably a B tier unit if it was tier 2, but it's a tier 3 unit. The Winged Lancers though in this game, they're a pretty decent heavy cavalry unit, but the problem is that it's a bit too little too late, and more importantly, you'll see we have another unit which challenges them for this spot and does a better job for longer. So it can certainly hang around here in tier 3 and does a pretty darn good job of getting around enemy lines and really especially getting those juicy charges into the rear. But again, once you start to first heavy infantry with armor piercing, this is going to start to hurt you as much as it hurts them. So a good unit, but you won't be able to keep it around until the later stages, and you compare that to the Streltsi, the Tzar Guard, which will stick around till tier 5, it just makes this a bit situational, especially when it has to contend against the Light War Sled. Now, the White War Sled is an excellent unit. It is fast, nimble, and if you're not good at micro, honestly, probably give this a miss. It does require a lot more micro, and you'll probably do better with the Winged Lancers because getting the occasional rear charge is a bit easier than flying around like a maniac. Lord abilities will discount the upkeep of these war sleds, so you can run multiple in an army, but then again, you have to have the micro to back it up. But why would you micro these things? Well, here's the deal. There is a heavy variant of this unit, but they have virtually the same offensive stats, mainly in their ranged weapon, which is an armor-piercing gun. And this thing can kite around enemies like Bloodthirsters, Greater Unclean Ones, and they're damn accurate as well. So they certainly are a unit that is worth keeping around. Now, when viewing the tier 4 heavy war sleds side by side, they're virtually the same in terms of melee stats, doing the same damage. They've got the exact same armor-piercing gun, but they give up 9 speed, and this takes them down to 66, a speed that you're going to start getting caught by a lot of enemy units. And even with that extra armor, you don't want to get caught. You want to be doing your engagements, playing through enemy units. So if you do take this, it's certainly C tier usable, but you'll be wanting to run this like more of a traditional chariot, going through enemy lines. A saving grace for both the war sled variants is that the building you will want in every major province come the end of the game. It boosts your economy as well as +1 global recruitment, so you'll want this in every province, and though not your first choice, it is at least going to be widely available. Just a quick reminder guys, if you are enjoying the video, please consider liking and subscribing, it really helps out. Ask any question in the comments, I answer everything. And if you'd like to talk strategy, feel free to join the Discord. Cheers. Now cutting to the chase, the creme de la creme, the best unit in the entire roster and one of the best units in the entire game, the Bear Cavalry. You will likely have the useless tier 3 version of this building that produces them ready just so you can fire it up to get these available at the edges of all of your provinces. But the truth is you don't need many of them because this unit just does not die, especially when you pair it with the other S tier unit, the Patriarch. The Bear Squad combination is something so good it will basically be relevant for the rest of the game. Patriarchs are plentiful, easy to get, and once you get Warbear Riders you can keep them alive indefinitely. They cover every single vice that Kislev have, which is largely going to be big monsters as well as enemy heroes. The Kislev roster do lack duelists and the ability to really snipe down enemy heroes and characters compared to other factions, and a group of these will just tear anything apart. It's anti-large, it's armor piercing damage, and they last so long they'll even hold the line. Now you can spam these, but the truth is they are still quite expensive. Are they worth the cost? Absolutely. They essentially cover all of Kislev weaknesses in a single unit, but you don't need to have 18 of them. Borosurs can rock an army predominantly of these or even entirely of these. Personally, I still like to try to keep my costs relatively down, and I think between 4 and say 12 in any army is the most you'd ever need. Personally, I find 8's enough, and if you're trying to save money, even 6 will be enough to have a considerable impact and using the rest of your army on a mobile firebase. A great way of using these in tandem with your Kossars is to basically use them to push and funnel the enemy into your mid-range firepower, which is the strength of the Kislev army, by bullying and using their large mass and their aggression to force the enemy into that area and then hold them in there, pinning them in there, being hit by ice magic, bullets, arrows. That is how you deal amazing damage with the Kislev, and they are such a fundamental unit. If you're starting to fall behind militarily in your campaigns, trust me, recruit 6 of these in all of your armies and you will see your misfortunes turn around. Next up, we have another solid and highly dependable unit, the Little Grom, and a lot of people argue to put this in A tier, and I think there's some good merit for that. Is it an A tier piece of artillery? I don't think so. It's pretty damn good though. It's accurate, it does damage, and it's got a bear towing it, so if you're going to try to take it out, it's going to take a chunk out of you trying, so that much is excellent. It also synergizes very, very well with the Kislev roster, so there's definitely, it flirts with A tier I'd say, but it doesn't quite do enough damage in the later portions of the game to really warrant that strong A tier. You can live without it. If you could unlock this at tier 3, I could be convinced that it's A tier, but it's tier 4, just doesn't quite hang as strong as against the other A tier artillery in this game. Now, artillery in essence is probably a weakness of Kislev. They can be outranged. So is it a good habit to have one or two of these in your main armies? I would say absolutely, yes it is. Just keep in mind, when you have warbears, they also have siege attacker, negating the need to bring this with you. So if you are going to bring it because you want that long range damage to snipe down towers or force engagements. It supports the Kislev playstyle, and I can see why some players consider it a staple. Next up, Gryphon Legion, and boy do I want to like these guys. Like I said, I'm a massive fan. These guys should be amazing. I just wish both these winged variants were both down a tier. Then you could get some proper use out of them, but unfortunately you have the Bear Squad with the Patriarch leading the warbears into battle, keeping them alive, boosting their only weakness, which is maybe a charge bonus. And then you have these guys, and they just don't do the armor piercing that you would need them to do at this stage of the game. They are not actually a bad unit. If they didn't have such stiff competition, they could be C and even flirting with B. However, they do have the competition, and they are just outshone and cost way too much for what they deliver, and it pains me, but I'm here to tell the truth, not what you want to hear. I'm sorry. While they still can perform well situationally, performing an anti-infantry role really is redundant when monsters will be the fear of your gun lines, and you have ice magic and tempest magic to deal with infantry, and they will be very highly leveled by tier 4. Finally, to top off tier 4, we have in A tier the Ice Guard. This is the premier elite archer unit, and having a late game archer unit is actually very good in a mid-range army like Kislev, as these guys can volley over the top of your gun lines while they do their work. Some people have compared them to Sisters of Avalon, and that simply is not true, particularly in the ranged case. They do not deal good armor piercing damage, but they deal frostbite with their attacks, and this also synergizes with all the other magic and means of slowing down the enemy, meaning they have to go through a hail of snow, bullets and arrows just to get close to you, so they help you perform your game plan even better. All Ice Guard fire the exact same arrows, and they just do an incredible job at this. Zarina Katarin has bonuses with them, and she can reduce their upkeep, so in her armies you'll most likely want to have probably 8, 10, even 12 of these. Personally, I like to run hybrid armies of roughly half mobile warbears and the other half being a core of archers and gunpowder. Having 2 of these sitting in the back can do a really good job. Now, where they separate themselves away from Sisters of Avalon is they have their ice weaponry. This tier 4 variant dual wields ice blades, and it does a decent job. It delivers anti-infantry damage, but you just don't really want these girls getting in melee combat. You want them afar, slowing the enemy, and even though the arrows don't do as much damage, if they do come close, you can hit them back. Now, the tier 5 version, on the other hand, has much better stats for an archer by having 40 melee defense as opposed to 32, meaning if someone does get close to it, they'll be able to hold the enemy off while you deliver some close range gunfire, charge someone in, and get them freed up. But again, this is arming them for a situation you never want them to be in. So why are they still A tier? Well, at some point your economy will start doing well. Finally, as Kislev, I know it takes a while, but it will start doing well, and this will just be an extra cost, which makes them better at doing what they need to do. And if anyone does get close, that extra melee defense will keep them alive for longer for that help to come. So because you don't ever want them to get in melee, cut your costs by getting the basic sword variant at tier 4, and when your economy improves, why not just get the halberd variant. And between 2 and 4 in any army will help assist that backline, and the halberd version will help anyone coming into your flanks. Next up, I know this can be hard well earlier than now, but I've just decided to keep it separated so we can address it all at once at the end with the aforementioned units, and that is the Kislev mages with the unique frozen schools of magic, which are ice and tempest. Now, these schools of magic are a bit divisive. Some people don't like them because they don't have the sheer destructive power, but I still argue as them being, at least in the context of Kislev, being A-grade schools of magic. Why is that? Well, they complement the Kislev playstyle and help the army they're a part of accelerate at what they do best. Kislev are a mid-range gunfire and arrow-based army with burly melee, but they need to be attacking head-on, and they use their cavalry to ensure those engagements are favourable. The power that you can get on the battlefield thanks to ice magic and tempest magic is really beneficial here. Tempest is tempting because of the bombardment spells, biting wind, the ability to deal damage quite early on, whereas the Law of Ice has Ice Sheet, its signature spell, which allows you to slow down the approaching enemies, letting your gunfire and arrows do what they need to do for longer. It's dirt cheap, covers a great range, and does very well, and when you can herd the enemy together, Heart of Winter is a devastating damage spell. It comes in clutch, and man, it can be decisive in winning battles. Tempest has Blizzard, and while it's more expensive, it will still do the job. I myself like to have one caster of each school in each of my main armies to allow both spellbooks at my disposal. Ice for its utility and clutch spells, Tempest for its reliable damage dealing. Frost Maidens and Frost Witches can both ride a bear mount, and the way you recruit them is through the Ice School. Katerin can start hiring these guys as early as turn 9. Other Kislev factions will have to wait till turn 13 till their first Ice Maiden is trained, but really you don't even need to build buildings to get these out, and they'll have the custom buffs from going through the Ice Schooling. They are an incredibly useful and important component of the Kislev game plan. I absolutely love how they sit sideways on the bear saddle. It looks badass, and getting them around tier 1 or tier 2 cements them as an S tier unit, and by tier 4 they will be doing all of the anti-infantry work for your army. Finally, moving on to our last entry, and that is the Elemental Bear. This thing gets a mixed review. Some people really like it and think that you can use a few to really take down enemy monsters, big units. It essentially answers enemy armies which have big nasties at the front. It makes a great anvil for your warbears to pile into. They do soak a lot of attention, but they're pretty tough, and yeah, they will do quite well here. Their biggest weakness is their speed. Given that your Kislev formation will want those ranged units moving up with shields on the front and sides, with your warbears out wide on the flank to help control them into that center area. 1 or even 2 elemental bears can march up the middle and help tar pit the enemy, giving your ranged units some breathing room, but this really is not a doom stackable unit. You can do it, but it really needs the plethora of research behind it to help this unit really reach its heights. You could almost look at this as a tier 6 unit. It has to be well into the late game when you do have a really strong economy and all the research buffs to make this thing excel into where it needs to be. It's certainly not a unit that you need, and all the aforementioned A and arguably B tier units will help you get there, but give them the right research and they certainly can make a good center point unit for the focus of your army. Just to confirm, don't rush to produce these guys. Stick with your bear squads, your Tzar Guard and your frost magic, and you will do fine. Adding 1 or 2 later can be fun, and they've got a nice breath attack to boot. And that concludes the tier list here. It's you can really see that Kislev are a very rounded faction. I never thought I would enjoy this faction, but they are one of my favorite in the entire game. They are so much fun to play, purely by the virtue of the fact that everything in their army can work together. The way that you should read this tier list if you're a newer player, S tier is the stuff that will pull up any army, and you should absolutely hire these in every campaign. A tier is also units that you will essentially hire in most campaigns. So if the bread and butter of your armies is in the S and A tier, you're doing something right, and you should be looking in the B and sometimes C tier for units that will help support these. Through much of the campaign, the basic Kossar will comprise much of your armies. You only need 2 to 4 Kossars, replacing them with Tzar Guard once the campaign progresses, and gradually phase out those Kossars with armor-piercing Streltsi or Guard from behind. Come tier 4, all of your characters should be mounted on bears, and Bear Cavalry will be able to charge in with devastating effect, boosted by Patriarchs, and using Ice and Tempest magic to do the rest of the work. Your mediocre economy will require you to deliver very well on the battlefield, and hopefully this list has been able to help you with that. Please add in the comments. This tier list will be revised in a couple of years' time. Everything is tested, and I really appreciate all of your feedback. But thank you so much for watching. Discord details in the description. This is Elven Plot Armor, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.